Hey everybody, 4 o'clock, last session. Everybody nice and hungover and ready to go for round 2. Not sure we did deserve the 4 p.m. slot, but here we are. So a couple things, hopefully we'll get you out here a little early. If not, and you need to doze off a little bit, no offense taken. So,
well, I mean, like ego.
Little offense taken, but that's okay. So my name is Amit Patel. I'm the Director of Business Relationship Management and FinOps for the Walt Disney Company, specifically in the organization called Disney Entertainment and ESPN Product and Technology. If you caught all that, I think last week we were Disney Media and Entertainment Division. Before that, I think Disney Streaming Services, and I'm sure it'll be something else next week. And this is Chris. I'll let Chris introduce himself.
Thanks, Amit. Christensen, and much like we can shorten that to D-E-E-P-T or DEEPT, I'll happily go by Chris. And I make magic here as well in the BRM and FinOps group, and I have a little background in networking and infrastructure.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so hybrid cartography and mapping to optimize application footprints will be the meat of the discussion today, but we will spend a little bit of time talking about kind of our general FinOps journey. I myself, coming to FinOps X for a few years now, kind of enjoy hearing other teams and organizations talk through their focus areas, their problems, how they're looking at things. So we will spend a little bit of time talking about that, and then kind of talk about how everything we've done is trying to help us make build a smarter framework to make future tech investment decisions.
I mean, we love our episodics. So wanted to give a little shout out and call back to those that came before us. I think this is our 3rd year that we've represented Disney at FinOps X. And Ali kicked us off, who started with discussion around savings and spend reduction, or also known as, was it optimized or was it February? And Ellie, last year, did a very insightful presentation on forecasting and a keynote as well. And that's because, well, oops really isn't a valid budgeting strategy. And you have us here today. Really, really proud of the folks before us. Thank you very much for having us here today, and we're looking forward to many years to come.
Yeah, sadly, Ali and Ellie are no longer with us, so hopefully we'll break the trend for FinOps X in 26, but TBD what happens. She's still alive. She's sitting right there. Ali is as well. She's on her way home, but
we're going to break the chain this go around.
Yeah, we'll hope to break some trends. So here's a little bit of the agenda of what we'll cover today. Like I said, we'll talk about our FinOps evolution. We'll talk about our journey, our where in the organization we sit, how we interact with other teams within Disney, and then of course, Chris will talk your ear off until your heart's content on application mapping and data center. So,
as Amit mentioned, here's a visual of where we sit in the Walt Disney Company. As you might imagine, companies as large as Disney has multiple lines of business, many teams, functions that span across the company. For us, the easy way to think about it is there's a corporate layer that sits across everything. And then there are 3 core segments, Disney Entertainment, ESPN, and Disney Experiences. Disney Entertainment does all things like studios, shows, direct-to-consumer, ESPN, sports, and Disney Experiences are your parks and your cruises and other things like that. Product and technology, DEEPT, is the team that manages and supports Disney Entertainment and ESPN, and that has quite a bit of the technology spend, so the cloud, the SaaS, the infrastructure that runs a lot of those products and the streaming. But we also want to make sure we don't operate too independently from each other. So again, that's where enterprise technology comes in, and also the outreach between these segments so that we're kind of keeping each other apprised of strategy and where we're going next.
Yeah, so one of the areas that I want to focus on that we don't really talk about much, I feel like, at FinOps X, I think you've all seen probably a version of this slide that shows FinOps sitting at the center of all these different teams that are around it. But the part I want to talk about a little bit more is the BRM, or the business relationship management aspect to our team. Chris and I have very different backgrounds. He's an engineer, a very smart guy. I'm this average bumpkin that's done a bunch of random hodgepodge of things and just kind of fallen into FinOps. And so when we started doing this for Disney, we viewed BRM and FinOps as kind of 2 pieces of the same puzzle. FinOps being your cloud forecasting, your cost optimization, your governance, things like that. But then we started feeling a little bit of a black box when it came to kind of our external side of the house. And so that's when we kind of formalized business relationship management. And so, how we look at that is BRM is kind of the connective tissue between internal stakeholders, engineering and product, and kind of the external partners. So, what does that actually mean, right? So we, from a BRM perspective, kind of manage everything before, during, and after the contract execution process, right? So to give a more specific example, with a room of FinOps practitioners, I don't have to tell you, we have a lot of institutional knowledge when it comes to unit rate pricing, consumption patterns, engineering behavior, product roadmaps, all those different things that can actually weigh heavily on a negotiation strategy. And so we partner with the enterprise technology teams, the strategic sourcing teams, to kind of put together a better approach that's just not focused on just pricing, which is important, but all these other things that we can leverage from our partners, right? And so, beyond the contract, like, we are also kind of making sure that we're holding our partners accountable, right? And so, we don't treat them as a black box. We push for consumption reviews, joint optimization sessions, want to make sure we're maximizing our relationship. Like, we want to do a big migration. You guys help fund that for us. We want to do this. You guys help us do that, right? Like, all those types of things. We expect them to come to us with identifying waste and opportunities. If they're not doing that, then we escalate that and we raise that as a flag, right? This is a partnership, not just like a vendor relationship. So, and that level of engagement has allowed us to actually kind of punch above our weight. We've actually taken quite a bit of work off of the engineers and the product teams when it comes to those types of things. And it's allowed us to have a little bit of a louder seat at the table, and something, where we've been successful in showing kind of insight and influence at every step. So it's allowed us as a function to be a bit smarter, a bit more connected, and ultimately more impactful.
And to elaborate a little bit more on the before, during, and after of BRM and the landscape in general, is it kind of helps to think about products and the technologies behind them. So Walt Disney Company's many beloved brands are accessible to streamers in other ways via different products and features, whether that's Election Night on ABC, and/or Moana 2 on Disney+, Only Murders in the Building on Hulu, or maybe Monday Night Football and Super Bowl in 2027 on ESPN. So the technology group, really works to ensure a seamless experience as possible, whether that is a unified login across those streaming properties, or a Hulu and ESPN on Disney Plus experience, or just the general availability of all of those streams and products globally, and then across hundreds of devices on streaming products. From a technology perspective, practically speaking, the implementation can form from multiple mergers, different eras, evolving roadmaps, coming from numerous partners, working with many different SKUs, or maybe one very specific vendor that has kind of a very, niche and important thing. So it really doesn't make sense to look at this like as a specific vendor or a specific group. It really is important to look at it holistically. So before, during, and after, and across all scopes. And one thing we've really come to embrace across FinOps efforts, whether that's cloud, on-prem, SaaS, is that visibility really remains the single most critical foundation. You can't manage what you don't measure. Without clear tagging, reporting, and cost allocation, forecasts and optimization simply can't happen in a meaningful way. This slide, Ellie's cloud forecasting presentation from last year, it just stands relevant generally for SaaS and on-prem scopes as well. Visibility is the entry point, enabling forecasting, which in turn unlocks smarter optimizations. Equally important is governance all along. It all ensures we sustain these practices over time. And as we scale FinOps across more of the scopes, we found that driving consistent visibility, especially in SaaS and on-prem environments, is where the biggest gaps still exist, but also where our biggest opportunities have been found as well. So visibility is really where everything starts.
Yeah, so we first started, much like everyone else, we started with cloud. It was where there was the most cost pressure, the most kind of need, where we had the most visibility, where we had the most mature tooling and things like that, right? So, but when we went deeper, it became clear that we were kind of just looking at one piece of a broader picture. I'm sure many of you have hybrid environments, right? We have a cloud, on-prem, growing portfolio of SaaS platforms. And these are just critical to us delivering products, but also fundamental in how we manage and analyze increasingly large data sets. And so, as our maturity around cloud FinOps increased, we did the things like everybody does, right? Tagging and cost allocation, forecast accuracy, all those types of things. We realized we were missing some pretty big adjacent costs. And that's how we kind of got into the on-prem and applying the principles across all the scope, the three scopes of cloud, on-prem, and SaaS, right? So, we're different levels of maturity across all of them. Cloud, the most mature, on-prem, which I promise we'll get to today at some point, that's coming together, albeit with its own unique challenges. And then the latest come in is SaaS, right? So with starting to link contract terms to business unit accountability, all those types of things. So, and then to get on my soapbox a little bit, one of the reasons why we're not as far along as I'd like to be is just truly bandwidth and resource constraints. I imagine many people across here can listen to me vent for a second about not being able to scale the team as quickly as the demand has required. So that's kind of been a pain for me. So I digress. Back to the topic at hand. So one example though that I like to give that's recently happened is how kind of all of these scopes have come together for us. We have a very important data platform environment that sits on premise currently that supports one of our direct-to-consumer products. And it's heavily reliant on a third-party license that is deployed on our hardware. Through one of our normal renewal cycles that we just went through, that partner came back and decided that they wanted to double their costs. I imagine we've all experienced some of that, right? So very quickly, our on-prem environment just became economically, just didn't make sense. Doesn't make sense anymore. So we're going through kind of a big 18 to 24 month project to effectively like re-architecture and figure out how we're gonna do this, right? Now, not great for engineers, not great for priority and things like that. But from a FinOps perspective and a BRM perspective, we're kind of using it as a forcing function, right? To say that we need a bit more influence on some of these decisions, right? And so now our new setup is going to be a mix of everything: cloud, SaaS, we'll maybe go through some open source for the hardware that we currently have. But we're leveraging this to make sure that we are involved heavily at the beginning. This has actually springboarded us to create what we're calling a strategic tech partnerships program and structure, which allows us to look at all these different attributes from contracts to all of our hybrid environments to say, here's what's important over the next 6 months, here's what's important over the next 12, 18 and beyond, so that we don't find ourselves in this situation again. I'm sure we will, but we can at least try to avoid it as much as humanly possible. So it's just trying to manage this so that we make a smarter, more informed decisions going forward. Not going to spend a ton of time here. We've kind of talked about it ad nauseum already, but we started with cloud. Just like most teams do, we focused on the foundational areas of like right sizing and commitment management and dashboard alerts and things like that. We've built out tooling and visibility. We're a FinOps shop at Disney, so that's what we're leveraging for some of our visibility tools. But where we've actually, just to scratch at something a little bit more, where we started to lean a bit is something beyond just like aggregate numbers, like we're spending this on AWS, we're spending this on GCP, this much in S3, this much in EC2. It's more like, what is our business metrics and how is that looking like? So for us, like what's our cost per subscriber? What's our cost per product? What's our cost per stream, right? Those types of things that can actually make really good informed decisions on our product roadmaps and allocate engineering hours to things that are actually gonna be a significant ROI. As you might imagine for Disney, kind of the front and center thing is profitability. And so that's, tying those KPIs into our FinOps like OKRs and goals is actually a really cool strategic advantage that we have. So, it's more important than ever that we make sure all these things make sense. And of course, starting in cloud jump-started us into the other scopes.
So as Amit mentioned, teams start in the cloud. And then as we tried to look at some of these other scopes, we observed a unique set of problems when studying on-prem, for example. Unlike cloud, there's no CUR. There's no single source. It's a mix of OpEx and CapEx. There are variable costs like power, interconnection, and fixed costs like hardware and integration. But that really it has to exist, right? We have a significant on-prem infrastructure, whether that's because of legacy needs of it existing or there's other requirements like latency or security. So we gave the example of the data platforms environment, and that's used for analytical workloads, for example. We also have other direct-to-streamer environments, that have like numerous caching layers that maybe servers live inside of ISPs and then do caching communication back to like core data centers, that have more space, power, and storage. So it's probably no surprise to this group, when looking at on-prem, is that just the complexity increases as the number of moving pieces increases. So, from a managed service with a cloud or application or platform, when you move down into the physical or hardware layer, there are just more moving pieces, and that does increase the complexity. So to approach this, add the scope, we adopted FinOps principles: inform, operate, optimize, and in these environments, we measured utilization, drove some consolidation, and then also held some of the business accountable for capacity management. So no doubt, it's harder to do in a CapEx world, but it's still very worth it in terms of actually going through the exercise of mapping, and then ultimately, as the title might imply, some hybrid cartography.
And so kind of the latest frontier that we're on is SaaS. We're calling it our third frontier. We started with cloud, again, and went to on-prem, and then SaaS was a little bit of a blind spot for us. It was growing fast. Spend is skyrocketing. Usage is fragmented. We don't know who was using what, where, why, how, all those types of things. So we kind of stepped in, created a light FinOps framework, specifically for SaaS. We're not trying to boil the ocean just because we just can't, we're not staffed for it, but we're targeting the highest spend areas, the most critical, and kind of focusing in on ones we know that are significantly important to our actual products themselves, things like data platforms and observability tooling and things like that, right? So one of the first things we did was build a SaaS inventory. We pulled this from a variety of sources: finance forecasts, procurement systems, stakeholder interviews, things like that. And try to get at least as complete of a picture as we can in what we're using and why, and try to categorize them as well, which we'll lean into a little bit later. But we partner with the business units to review kind of the overlapping tools and have real conversations of what we're using. So we're now getting to like the team level building forecasts, right? Just like we did for cloud. So, kind of maturing a bit beyond just Snowflake, X, whatever. Tagging it back to teams, making sure that they understand what they're spending and trying to get them more involved. The BRM side plays a huge role in this as well. We're partnering directly with vendors, pushing them for usage transparency, negotiating smarter feature tiers, trying to leverage the contract for other things like training and credits and all those types of things. So while this is kind of the latest thing that we've done, it's getting very quickly to become one of the ones that we want to do right. And so that's where we're at with this one.
So we've looked at how on-prem and SaaS scopes can build on the successes that we've seen in cloud. And then we've also acknowledged that there are numerous products using various services and many locations. And to some degree, just having a non-greenfield environment is hybrid. But I think there's a way to be a little bit more intentional in terms of how we continue to map a footprint. So recall the challenges that we enumerated on-prem, for example. One of the things on data center and networking that is used often is Open Systems Interconnect, or OSI layers. And this is layers ranging from 7, which is the application layer, down to 1, which is physical, and there are different functions in between specific to networking. But interestingly, that pairs pretty nicely with this concept that we have products, kind of at the top, and that kind of works down to a physical layer. So if you look at through the lens of this, you can start to rationalize where some unit costs might be, and then unit costs that might be comparable if you're trying to compare two things. Particularly in a hybrid environment. So let me give you a couple of examples of some successful business decisions that we use using the OSI approach, and then those comparisons using in total cost of ownership evaluation. So in a storage world, maybe you have a live service like Hulu that needs a DVR, and so you can pause your live show or set it up to record to watch later. You have the choice to store that on maybe a cloud, like an S3 bucket or something like that, or maybe on-prem with disks and software to support those disks to do it. And then maybe you have some other decisions like, should it be on-prem, on spinning disks or on fast disks, or should it be in the cloud in Glacier or fast access or infrequent access. So one way to look at that, you've got those two comparisons, is maybe look at your access patterns. So, you're really gonna rewatch that Bluey episode that you recorded yesterday? Or is that going to be maybe just something that sits on disk for until it's deleted? Again, those unit costs from the comparison at the OSI are useful for doing the hybrid comparison. Another one, we mentioned the analytical workloads earlier. So the analytical workloads example was on-prem, but our data teams work on-prem. They also work in other SaaS environments as well as in regular cloud environments. As a matter of fact, when they look at workloads and are evaluating where a data product should be deployed, they actually have this concept called right data, right destination, R2D2. And that's a very good compute example. Distribution, we have CDNs. They bill, if you're not familiar, they bill in a gigabyte transferred, so the unit cost, dollar per gigabyte transferred, very FinOps unit cost model. When you take that as a service provided, cloud, SaaS, however you classify CDN, and compare that to running something on-prem, for example, like our edge installation that I mentioned that has servers like NISPs or different colos. There may be dozens of vendors, right? From the colo provider to the network provider to the hardware that you're deploying to the optics and the interconnect and comparison. So in that specific example, the unit that we compared is we said, okay, well, the CDNs have this dollar per GB. Let's wrap the entire edge installation cost to get the dollars, and then look at that from the total GB transferred, and then we can compare those next to each other to actually get a value. My opinion here is that there's a lot of similarities to tagging in cloud. We talk about how important that is and how much value that gives in terms of the insight and what you're able to see and ultimately get it to the application or business strategy level. And you can tell from a mapping standpoint or using a model like OSI, it's got a lot of similar value, and you're ultimately trying to get to that application layer. Working with the architecture and the engineering groups obviously is a FinOps foundation principle, but here it also really pays dividends in terms of that tagging exercise or that mapping exercise to get what you need. One other thing I want to mention from a FinOps perspective that's kind of really valuable by doing this, I kind of enumerated some examples, is that it can form an application inventory that's somewhat of a strategic tool or asset. Said another way, if somebody asks you and they say, okay, we're gonna, we have a refresh coming up, or we're gonna deploy something or redeploy something, you can take this, these examples of this historical where you've done an on-prem versus cloud exercise or derived unit rates, and you can actually use those and play them forward in that analysis. So it either provides you a benchmark, starting price for where you want to look and do the analysis, or actually a kind of a foundational model to actually perform a unit cost comparison. So those aforementioned examples really turn into a library that you can use, and I mean, that's a real interim benefit to kind of organizing your information holistically overall. And I'll say this, as we've done that, because those are kind of tasks assigned, or like a specific example where you say, oh, there's a redeployment, I have this business analysis to do, you then kind of ask yourself in the FinOps practitioner role, like, can this be automated? Should we use the FinOps framework? And that ultimately gets you to say something like, oh, well, maybe we should use Focus. That's a great example. And we tried to do that. I think it's pretty evident from the examples I gave before on-prem that using something like Focus as a FinOps practitioner would be very valuable. And we pivoted a little bit. We looked at it from an application-specific examples or very one-off use cases. Because on-prem doesn't lend itself to that curve format that is so valuable on the cloud side, but it's clear that there would be useful value, and that really lends itself to talking with vendors and saying, hey, look, we're looking for these dimensions that we're being pressed or pressured in terms of cloud comparison. It would be very beneficial for us to look at them from the same way. Same with your stakeholders and your engineering teams and looking at those dimensions, and ultimately that kind of bubbles back up to visibility. And I'll kind of take a step here and say, to bookend the hybrid cartography kind of view of this, and because I mean, that's just brownfield, hybrid, it's kind of, it's the catchy name piece. In Disney technology, there are a couple of core principles that are, we all kind of agree to and work towards. Velocity, impact, innovation, user centricity, optimism, and fun. Those are excellent, they're important, that's what we want to align to. So, I think with tasks like working on Focus and really empowering teams with total cost of ownership analysis by democratizing the data and cost as well, that enables visibility, but it's also enabling those core principles in terms of velocity and impact that are so important to our technology organization as well.
So just to kind of reiterate the point and put it as directly and plainly to what Chris just articulated, because I just don't want to undervalue the team the work that his team did. So 2 years ago, when we first started getting into on-prem FinOps, we could map our applications in the cloud. We knew where things were and how they worked and things like that. We had nothing when it came to on-prem. We've had legacy data centers that are owned by Disney. We had other data centers that are colos. We've had broadcast and linear sitting in one. We've had streaming sitting in another. We've got empty rooms. We've got full rooms. We don't know what's operating where. And Chris and team went through the manual process of going and trying mapping at all of those things. So now when someone comes to us and says, hey, Amit, I got something I need to put on-prem. Where do we have some room? We can answer that question. I've got something I need to deprecate. Where is it? Oh, it's right here, right? What are the impacts by that, right? Oh, we can point that out. So It's a lot. It was a very manual process, but it's super, super valuable. It's going to be manual to maintain. So if anybody has any ideas on how we can kind of automate this thing, all ears. But it was a lot of great work, and so I implore you to pick Chris's brain on how he did it in more detail when at the party or whatever it is. So of course, it hasn't always been smooth sailing. We've gotten a bunch of friction points. We've got inconsistent data quality, tooling limitations, all those types of things. But instead of kind of waiting for the data to be right or perfect, we just tried to just do the best we could and make chose progress over perfection. We started by partnering with the teams, trying to make their lives a little bit easier. Not trying to be kind of a controlling function. I know FinOps is all about kind of managing the spend and control, but Chris alluded to something that earlier on, like these principles of Disney that we're trying to get to this year, which is very anti-Disney, which is great, which is being more velocity enabling instead of velocity killing. And so we're trying to kind of take that approach to make sure the teams want to work with us, that they want us in the room and all those types of things. So, again, one of the biggest things we learned, don't wait for perfect data, get directional alignment, create feedback loops, be open to feedback, and it's amazing how that will benefit things. And while we're still evolving, the shift has been clear. You can see the kind of the little workflow that we've developed here, but we are now getting much more involved ahead of time on being able to helping teams understand the cost of what they're trying to do before decisions get locked. It's not perfect, but they're also coming for other things too. Like, hey, I have this idea, I don't know where to deploy it. Like, who can I partner with? Like, who out of our cloud partners, who has some credits or ProServe dollars that we can use to do this, right? So we're getting involved in kind of every kind of aspect, and it's been really great. And so it's like helping us be to enable, to be more informed, and help teams make kind of better decisions. And then as far as where we go next, as we look ahead, our focus is going to be deepening the reach and impact of FinOps across our entire tech stack. We're building automation to connect like application level models. I'm trying to make not just the product engineering team's life easier, I want to make my life easier. So trying to automate and do things like that. Trying to expand also kind of observability cost controls. So we've built kind of an internal tool to help flag some cost anomaly detection early and in real time, and getting that access to teams so they can see it, so that we're not waiting kind of a month later and we've already spent $500,000 or whatever it is when we could have avoided it in real time. So we're trying to get better about that. And then, one of our biggest goals is trying to develop kind of one unified view, a single pane of glass, right? So as I mentioned, I think earlier, we use FinOut as that, and they have a mega bill function that I've just started rolling out to various executives literally over the past couple of weeks, and it's gone really, really well. Well, they're able to see for their cost center, their data platform spend, their cloud spend, their SaaS spend, and all of this in one view. It's been pretty game changing. So we're trying to do that. We're also trying to emerge with like standards like Focus, right? It would be great to just kind of have a standard across all platforms that would make things a lot easier. I don't know how we did it. We didn't talk about AI at all, but that is a huge focus area for us. That was a big topic of conversation while we were driving down to the conference, is understanding how things are what the cost models are going to look like, what we're using where, how do we get our hands wrapped around that, how do we make sure that we've got a controls over that. And then to continue doing things like looking beyond tooling. I mentioned like cost per subscriber, cost per product, cost per stream. We really want to like emphasize that a bit more for us, and have more like business driving KPIs and things that are measurable in that regard. And then, of course, continue with our kind of BRM practice, right? Get more involved with sourcing, kind of build out more robust contract strategies and vendor strategies and such. So for us, just kind of in closing, it's not just about cloud costs. Like I mentioned, it's about building a framework to understand what we own, why we have it, where we're using it, and how we can leverage it to make better decisions, down the line. So told you we get done a little early. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful. If not, then it is what it is.
Bars that way.
Open to questions if you have any.
Thank you.
We have time for some questions.
What did you guys offer to the on-prem teams, the data center teams, to get their buy-in? Like what was in it for them?
The not sexy answer was that we were sitting within the on-prem engineering services organization. So
There was a little more than that. I mean,
by all means, go ahead.
I think it harkens a little bit back to the BRM function as well, because we did kind of have a little bit of a white glove service in terms of sourcing and procurement. And I think when there was a little hesitant at first in terms of the data, but ultimately on a lot of the mapping and pieces, we went to the elevation data. And so that group is our tech facilities group and infrastructure. But we also took over some of their purchasing as well. And they were like, please renegotiate those for us. And that kind of started that discussion very evolving fashion.
Hello. So could you share with us some interesting business insights or just findings after you put all the data together through Focus? For example, the billing data from public cloud, the billing data from SaaS, from on-prem. So after you put all the data together, do you have any interesting findings or business insights? Yeah.
I think that hits back. We're talking about these dashboards. So we did the executive rollout of those, and that includes cloud, SaaS, as well as some CDN and on-prem views as well. And I think we had already had several engineering groups, both who provide that data and obviously our groups and stakeholders we work with reviewing that. I think one of the findings is we're just starting to speak from the same page a little bit, both from a finance level all the way to an engineering level. And I mean that from the engineering metrics, like the usage data, to the finance type data that's more cost driven.
Yeah. All right, we've got a question here in the back.
Hello. Is the really great talk, and I want to ask about the focus data, the particular like types of data and what focus columns that you map to. Right, for the data center, is any of that like public information or in blogs, so we can read about that?
Yeah, sure thing. We've been talking with Matt about that. JR kind of set us up in terms of, we'd looked at it internally and as this talk. Happy to provide it. I mean, at the base, it's like kilowatt hours or kilowatt amps, for the data center side and trying to get that and move it over. We did, one interesting story about looking at that is we did try to flip it on its head a little bit and say, okay, the Kerr is so amazing and it's very difficult to kind of get all the pieces to have a comparable on-prem Kerr. What if Amazon added on-prem style data to the Kerr, so like kilowatt hours? And there's some interesting stuff there. Amazon, other cloud providers do add fields that have to do with power, but oftentimes that's a little bit more for like ESG or sustainability projects, more so than like comparative, colo to data center type comparisons. But longer answer is yes. Happy to share what we have.
Right. So how did the on-premise versus cloud cost compare based on your analysis?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I'm going to flip back here a little bit because I didn't talk about it too much, but that's kind of what that margin piece is trying to call out a little bit. So outside of scenarios where we have kind of anomalous cost situations happen with the architecture of the platforms, generally speaking, if we're running it, we're basically kind of getting the margin back for the loss of that value. So there's on-prem tends to generally be more cost efficient, but that's not always how you're evaluating. You're looking at it through several lenses, whether you need to scale quickly immediately, and capacity roadmaps are going to be long, time to value, or marketplace changes. So it's not always a simple and easy answer, but if you're looking for the simple and easy answer, yeah, it tends to be a little cheaper on-prem, but you're taking on that from increased complexity, increased staffing, and those type of things.
The line items in your on-prem focus billing data set, do those represent physical hardware assets or the logical software-defined resources that are housed on those physical assets?
Short answer at this moment is the physical assets. I kind of mentioned we pulled the insights from the elevation data, That also might just be a behavior of how we generally operate. We do have clusters that run, Kubernetes or VMs, in which case, you really need to go a layer below the units, but we also have a substantial footprint of, running storage or, broadcast acquisition and like that. And so, it's very clear what that rack is taking up, and so you don't have to go like a layer deeper.
Piece of physical infrastructure is servicing one of those
Correct.
endpoints at the top of your cartography.
Yeah, correct.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. For more FinOps X 2025 content, go check out our YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and leave comments and questions for all of our wonderful speakers. We appreciate your support.